And then, are you going to drive adoption with digital inclusion and education? Boston has some really neat programs about how to do that. For $800, it's financed by Bank of America. It's, I think, a 5-year loan. A family gets a PC, desktop PC, monitor, printer, all included. They have to go to about 8 to 10 hours of training as a family, so both the kids and the parents, on how to use the PC. So all of a sudden you have an educated user, not just somebody that can afford a PC that they couldn't afford before. But how are you going to do that? And will that drive adoption? Will teaching people how to use the computers that they have or that they're buying to use broadband, will that drive the broadband subscription to the levels that you need to make your business models work? What are some of your surprises here? Who owns the poles? Pam Reeve likes to say that we have 60,000, this is her quote, 60,000 light poles in Boston with 60,000 stories. Verizon owns some of the poles. NSTAR owns some of the poles. National Grid owns some of the poles. Tons of different people own the poles in your city. One of the challenges is to go through with your GIS data and say, well, we know that these poles are all here, but do we have ownership rights assigned to them? Do we actually know who owns each one of these? If it's a wooden pole, does that mean that Verizon owns it, or does NSTAR own it because it's carrying your electrical lines and your telephone lines, but then that armature off of it is the city's property because we paid to install it, because we are the ones that are supporting the lighting for the city? It's a big question. What are the intentions of the ILECs? Are they going to stomp on this? Are they going to throw their arms up and say, hey, you can't do this, you're ruining our business? We certainly had some pushback at the state level when we started this out in Massachusetts, where the state officials were saying, this is going to kill the incumbents, you can't do this, you're going to put thousands of people out of work. And then, you know, like I said, out in Western Mass, they dropped in a D-SLAM and they killed half your market with $20 DSL. Then what about Kalia? This is something hiding in the back of the room. When I asked Jim Baller about this at the last conference, he said, oh, I'm not going there. I've dealt with Kalia too much in the last couple of weeks. It's a big question. Communications assistance to law enforcement agencies. How does that work? How are you going to log it? Are you a public or a private network? What are all the issues behind that? Then, of course, the technology surprises. Where's your power? Where's your backhaul? How do you get to the rooftops? We found out in Cambridge that we have to employ unionized electricians, contract electricians. Well, it costs us about $1,000 to get to each roof if it's not a city-owned building. If it's a city-owned building, we use those city electricians. But when we go to the Cambridge Housing Authority, or sometimes with the Cambridge Health Alliance or MIT or Harvard, if there's not a power outlet already on the roof for the HVAC unit, which is new building code as of the late 80s or early 90s, so if you have newer HVAC units, they will have power outlets. It costs us $1,000 to get to the roof. Well, you got to think about that when you start to think about your installation costs. If you have a $100 Meraki unit and it costs you $1,000 to install power and backhaul to the rooftop, that equation doesn't really work. Then, of course, how do you fill dead spots? Do you have a plan for filling dead spots? Does it mean sticking up another $5,000 unit? Is it sticking up a $100 Meraki unit or Ruckus Wireless unit? You gotta kind of have a strategy there to deal with some of these surprises, because these are predictable at this point. We can go back. We can go down to Corpus Christi and say, hey, what have you guys done? We can go over to Philadelphia and say, hey, why have you changed your design 5 times? We can do a lot. We can ask a lot of these questions now that we couldn't ask even maybe a year ago, because things have moved forward enough. And then, of course, the big question at the bottom: what happens if you miss your numbers, or your systems integrator? If you're a government official, if your systems integrator misses their numbers, how do you deal with that? Do you buy the network back like Granbury did? Do you have clauses like Brookline has that says that if your integrator does miss their numbers, you have the right to assume the control of the equipment to keep it up and functional? If you're putting public safety on this, that's a big question. This is going to be a black eye for politicians if it goes down, but more than that, it's critical government infrastructure that we're trying to put in here. How do we make sure that it has 24/7 uptime, even if the business doesn't? People don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. This is one of my favorite quotes. You've got to have some sort of review of your project to catch these issues early. You've got to think about it. It's one of those things that you can't just drop it in the hands of the integrator. They're assuming the risk, let them go with it, they know what they're doing. I know they like to tell you that, but you know, they don't always know what they're doing. We're all learning here. And an error does not become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. That's kind of the key thing. You have to be flexible enough and capable enough to go out and explain to your constituency, oops, we kind of tripped up, here's what we're doing to correct it. Believe me, they'll like that a lot better than walking 2 years down the road into $1 million loss saying, sorry guys, I forgot, but I'm out of office, see you later.